Hi everybody and welcome to another Rowing Chat. I can see we've got quite a few people getting into the chat box announcing their presence. Welcome. Thank you to some of our very loyal listeners who are now here for the second or third time. It's very good to see you on the group. Today we're welcoming Robin Williams as our guest. Robin, hello.
Hi Rebecca, hi, how are you?
Very, very good to speak to you. Right, let's kick right off and say, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I coach in the UK, currently with the GB Women's Group, although I do a little bit of work outside of that as well. And I guess most recently took the British women's pair through to the Olympic gold medal in London last year.
That must feel so good saying that.
Yes, it does feel good, yeah.
As part of setting up this call, we got some fantastic questions in from listeners. And so I'm going to kick straight off with a question that I think is an interesting one for all students of international rowing. Are individual athletes now training to the limit of their physiological competencies, leading us to find more extreme specimens in order to improve on performance?
Yeah, well, that is a good question, and in fact, there are a lot of good questions, as you say, have come in. I think the answer to that one is that we're obviously pushing people more and more, but I don't think we're at the limit. And we often say that the thing that limits your training is the amount of rest and recovery you can get. And of course, nowadays, being a full-time athlete, or if you like, a sort of professional in that sense of the word, means that you can get much better rest and recovery, so you can do a lot more training. It's difficult for club athletes, of course, to do that, but certainly internationally speaking, I think that's the case. But of course, in tandem, we are also better at searching out people who are anatomically suited to the sport, so we're much better at identifying bigger, stronger, taller athletes as well. So I think it's both those areas have led to an increase of training loads and or volumes.
Fantastic. And now for the question which I'm most looking forward to hearing your answer. Robin, how do you coach the catch as performed by your women's pair in the Olympics?
Yeah, well, how many hours have we got? To me, this is an area of the stroke which has always been really fascinating, because I see it as the sort of the golden key. If you can get that bit of the stroke cycle right, then you've got the chance to use to really get some good boat speed out of the rest of the stroke. And it's a whole bunch of things, but trying to sort of put it in a reasonably concise way, I think a lot of it is about timing and relaxation. Rather than brute force or power or even size. I think it's definitely a skill area as opposed to just doing something mechanical. So the sort of things that I try to get people to do is to be approaching the catch with being in balance themselves in the sense of their own body, but also in balance with the boat, so that they don't arrive too heavily or too clumsily. In fact, they try and make the least amount of impact on the boat that they possibly can. Incidentally, I think the Danish lightweight men's double from 2 or 3 years ago was particularly good at that. You could see they were very, very good at not disturbing the hull. So arriving quietly is one of the key areas. Timing the blade in so that you stay loose and relaxed with the arms, I think, is another one. And really the kind of the ability to, I suppose you're holding the handle as you go into the water and you have to pick up the boat with the feet. So it's the sort of the changeover between what your hands do and what your feet do, I think is a key thing. And, in most areas of life, if you want to pick something up or catch something, you do it with your hands. I think in rowing, you have to teach people to catch the boat with their feet. So that's maybe a little different from other things that we do. And there are other areas as well, like, just being aware of the hull speed, being aware of the people you're rowing with, so you obviously have to move in sync with each other. So it's a whole bunch of stuff, and it can be kept quite simple, or it can get very complicated the more you try and describe it. I think definitely you can get, Tim McLaren used to talk about paralysis through analysis. You know, you can work too hard to get it right and end up making it worse. So generally it's a less is more thing. I don't want to go on too long with my answers, Rebecca, because I know time is short, but it is a fascinating area of the stroke. I remember one little anecdote when we had a guy, Kieran West, who rode at Cambridge and won an Olympic gold medal with Martin McElroy back in 2000. And I remember when he, in 1998-99, described the front end, he just said, I suddenly realized I was doing far too many things. It was just a much more simple movement than I'd realized, and I just needed to just allow myself to glide forwards. There was nothing to hesitate or stop for or to over-prepare for. It was just a matter of drop the blade in and move my feet on, and that's how he described it to me as an athlete. So I thought that summed it up quite well.
Do you have a particular drill, Robin, that you like that teaches athletes how to use their feet, as you just described?
Quite a few. I mean, I suppose the favourite one is to do, feet only or legs only. So you just sit forwards and you just, practice rowing, moving off the beginning of the stroke, just moving through the feet without trying to do the whole stroke. I think a lot of technique actually is about just trying to isolate the particular component. So it might be feet only on the front end, or an arms only build up off the back end, that sort of thing. But I suppose for the front end, there are sort of different stages depending on the ability of the athlete. So the simplest version is to do it with the boat stationary, and people would be familiar with doing roll-ups. So you just come forwards, roll up and drop the blade into the water, so you have a sense of when to let the blade in, and then from that you start doing feet-only movements so that the boat is travelling forwards but slowly, and then you obviously build it all the way up to drills that you can do at full length and even at full speed. So I think it's a process you have to look at depending on the ability of the athlete. I mean, we even sometimes do what we call back downs. So we make the boat go backwards, and then, if you can picture this, then sit at backstops with the boat travelling the wrong way, and you roll forwards, put the blade in, and it sort of creates a catch for you, because obviously the water pushes against the blade because the blade's going backwards. So different stages, different levels of skill, but they're all essentially doing the same thing.
Yeah, I've certainly done a variation of back downs where you start at three-quarter slide with a blade buried, and you back down to the catch and then take a stroke. So it's perhaps a shorter version of what you just described. Yeah,
we sort of call those pushbacks. So the blade is in the water, as you say, at half or three-quarter slide, and you push it out to full slide and then reverse, and you can just keep sort of seesawing, changing direction. It gives you a good feeling of how to move through the legs and not to lift with the shoulders or that kind of thing. So, yeah, there's quite a lot of different exercises you can do for it.
I notice you have a very clearly positive word choice in your descriptions, Robin, that you're generally saying do this rather than do not do that. And I think that is a clear indication as to how good you are as an instructor, that your athletes are very clear what you want them to do, not what you want them not to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real trick, isn't it? I mean, because I think in coaching rowing, the challenge is you're always distant from the crew. You're on a riverbank or you're in a launch. And if you think about most other sports, if you're on a rugby field, you can physically stand next to the person you're teaching, or even in the swimming pool, you could get in the pool with them. But in rowing, it all has to be through language and, a little bit of demonstration, perhaps, if you're in another boat alongside. But, and of course, people constantly, two different people will take the same instruction two different ways. So that's always the battle, is to try and, I find anyway, is to explain what I want and then ask has everybody understood that, and then maybe if it's an 8 you'll find one or two will say no, and then you just have to find a different bunch of words to try and describe it in a way which they'll understand.
Moving forward then, what do you do to work out when the weather's bad with the British team?
To be honest, We don't often. We don't often have to do that because, I mean, unless it's only if the wind's blowing really hard and it's just physically sinking conditions that we wouldn't go out. Like most people, we sort of stick at it. Usually, I mean, it's just a matter of coming indoors and probably going on the ergo. And I mean, recently, for instance, we've had a lot of very bad weather over here, and it's thankfully improved a bit now. We were still going out on the water, but from a coaching point of view, I thought, well, we're not progressing that much, but we're maintaining where we are in technical terms, So we said, well, we're still getting some good physical training done, even though the conditions are bad. But I think that one of the key things there is to just day by day just talk to the athletes and make sure they're not getting any undue aches and pains. Because, I mean, if you keep going out in rough water, all the postural muscles work a lot harder, and you can get the sort of injuries that crop up, just from people having to constantly be balancing the boat and reacting to bad waves and washes, that sort of thing. So we tend to persevere. Occasionally we'll come indoors and do the same session on the ergo.
When you're developing athletes, how do you find the right balance of load, intensity and rest in order to get the best out of them without going to overtraining or undertraining? I think that one again is if you took beginners, I think you look at how much time they've got to train. They might be studying or working, how much rest and recovery they can get. And if they have any other sort of athletic background, are they used to sport, or are they starting from scratch? So I think it's all about whether the athlete is sort of robust enough to take the training, and there's no absolute right or wrong answer. I think you have to sort of set a workload which you think is about right for their age group and their gender and their experience and training background, and then start off like that. And then I think it's about just monitoring. So whether, I mean, it's a good thing for rowers to keep a daily training diary, for instance. So if you wake up in the morning and you've had a good night's sleep, well, you can write that in the diary. Or if you're even your mood state is important. If you wake up and you have enthusiasm to train, then that's a good thing. You should be okay to train. Sometimes when you wake up and you're really dead beat, you still have to go training, but I think that's when the coach starts to look for warning signs that maybe they're not coping. So it's a little bit of a juggling act, and of course with elite systems, with the British system or other national systems, I mean, we have physiologists and physiotherapists and doctors, and as well as the coach, who are constantly looking at how the athletes are coping with the training program, and the training program itself is a form of feedback. If they can't complete the training, then it's clearly too much. And it's a sort of day-on-day thing, isn't it? So, they can probably do it one day, but can they do it the next day and the next day and the next day? That's very, very clear. And if anyone listening wants a template training diary, I was given a copy by Harry Mahon of his one that he used to use, which I suspect, Robin, you know well. If anyone wants a copy of it, please get in touch and I'll send it over to you. In fact, it is on the Row Perfect website, but I struggled to remember where. Moving on to an interesting question about technology. Technology obviously has leapt forward in the last 20 years with all these smartphones and tablets, and there are lots of rowing and coaching apps and video cameras and rowing telemetry. Are there any of these that you find useful for your day-to-day coaching, and what do you find the most useful part of it for your coaching?
Well, yeah, they're definitely useful. I mean, I think the sort of bog standard video camera is still got to be the main coaching tool, and I mean, certainly we use that every day. We're lucky. I think Ron Needs maybe possibly listening in, but I mean, Ron is fantastic at helping us out and taking video for us regularly, and the athletes enjoy watching that. So I think if you're fortunate to have somebody who can take video a lot and keep showing it daily, then that's the best feedback. But we also, I'm a newcomer to iPads, but I have to say I'm very enthusiastic about them. And there are apps like Coach's Eye or UberSense that you can download, very, very cheaply, and they have wonderful sort of frame by frame. You can go backwards and forwards. For if an athlete, for instance, is just coming up to the catch, you can go into the catch and reverse back out and back in again and reverse back out, far smoother than you can with a standard video camera. And then you can also draw lines on the image, so you can say, ideally your back should be at this angle rather than that angle. That you can even measure angles, because I think most of them are derived from golf analysis and tennis programs. So they're quite a lot of fun and I think very, very useful. With iPhones and things as well. I mean, you can get acceleration type apps, and even ones that give you a sort of an acceleration noise or a sound. Like as the boat accelerates, the pitch increases, and ones like that I think are quite interesting, because they're all forms of feedback that mean something to the rower. But I think also, the low-tech ones are quite good still as well. I mean, I still occasionally get out, a length of plastic tubing and stick it to the stern of the boat to make a little fountain on the stern, if people are familiar with that one. And that's still a very, very good way of checking, is the boat traveling well between strokes, and particularly at the catch. And I even did one last year actually with the pair. It started off as a bit of a joke, but I bought some playing cards and I stuck it. I said, well, it'd be really interesting for you to know when your seat is close to front stops but not quite there, that you're nearly at the point where the blade needs to go in the water. So we stuck a playing card sort of vertically from the cockpit. So it just flicked the axle of the seat and made a sound. So that cost nothing at all, and actually was surprisingly useful. So every time they were 3 or 4 inches away from where the entry of the blade should be, there was a little click of the playing card against the axle. So, I don't think you have to go spending lots of money. Sometimes the simple solutions work really well.
I like the playing card one. I'm going to try that. Thanks, Robin. Now we're moving on to some of your technical skills. We've got a question. What's the best technical sculling drill? Because you've coached both sculling and sweep, haven't you?
Yeah. The best sculling drill. I'm a big fan of drills, and I'm always sort of on the lookout for new ones. And there seems to be no sort of limit to how many there are. As a best one, I think the key thing in a single is to feed the power in at the right rate, and I don't mean stroke rate. I mean you can overload a sculling stroke very easily because you've got more arc than you have with sweep. So I think the legs only drill is good, but actually also one of the ones that I really like is sculling at just low pressure. When you scull with just light pressure, you get sort of minimum amount of balance against the sculls, and you can't bully the stroke or tear them through the water or overwhelm or overload. You just get the hull moving just really evenly. So you have a little bit of pressure on the spoon and a bit of boat speed, and then you just maybe add a bit more pressure and you get a bit more boat speed. So I sometimes say, well, imagine you've got a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is flat out and 1 is really light. And try going from a 1 to a 2 to a 3 to a 4. So that's sort of progressive introduction of power. So that they're sculling in sympathy with the speed of the boat, and the work that they're putting in actually gives them something back.
That's fantastic. How many sessions a week do you use to build these rowing skills with drills with your crews? Do you just do it on specific sessions, or is it just part of normal everyday practice?
Yeah, it's really just part of everyday practice. I mean, occasionally there'll be a session in the program which is, written down as a technical session, pure and simple. But usually speaking, I sort of try to be a fairly methodical coach. So I like a structure to a training session. So even if it's going to be a work session, I'll generally brief the crew, and I'll say, we'll spend the first 2 or 3 kilometres doing this or that drill, as by way of warming up. So if I'm looking for them to have, better, let's just say basically better balance, then we might do some balance drills in that first 2 or 3 kilometres, and then we'll say, right, the aim for the next 45 minutes or an hour is actually training, and we're going to make sure the boat keeps moving, we're not stopping and starting, and then maybe near the end of the session we might do a little bit more technical work, sort of specific technical work there. But in my mind, but of course the whole point is that they're doing the technical work all the time, whether they're working hard or whether they're doing the technical drills. But so they tend to be incorporated into the sessions on the whole.
When you're training at Caversham, you've got a 2,000-metre lake. How do you get the crew to turn around fast and keep their heart rates up for those 45-minute, hour-long sessions?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a challenge, isn't it, on 2,000-metre courses. We do say turn quickly and maybe row off the first few strokes a bit more briskly just to get the hull speed back up again. But and of course, we do training on the river as well, like most people, and we go away on camps and train on nice long stretches of open water as well. And also on the ergo, of course, you can do the more constant training. So, it's not difficult to get the continuous working. One of the advantages of being on the lake is that from a concentration point of view, you say you only have to, really concentrate for 7 or 8 minutes at a stretch. By and large, I prefer to row on longer stretches of water, I have to say, and I love when if we go to Varese or some of the other sort of training camps that people go to. It's great to just go for mile after mile after mile without having to turn around.
Moving on to an interesting question about wrist strengthening. Can you recommend particularly good wrist exercises to build technique for oar rotation?
Yeah, I thought this was quite an interesting question, actually. I would, and the short answer is no, I don't, because but I know what the questionnaire means. The reason I'd say no, I don't, is because I think oar rotation, when the blade feathers or squares, is an unloaded state. In other words, people who get tenosynovitis in their forearms or repetitive strain injury, I think generally get it because they're trying to feather or partially feather the oar when it still has some load in it. So the wrist is actually working against some water, some load. So I think in theory, at least, if the oar is leaving the water unloaded, then turning it doesn't really require any significant strength at all. It's just like rolling it in the gate when when it's in the air. So I don't think it's important to do sort of specific wrist strengthening things. But one of the things with sweep that we do obviously is single arm work, so inside arm or outside arm, and with the inside arm, of course, the one arm has to do everything. It has to, draw the handle, extract the blade at the finish, feather it, square it again, as you do in sculling. So for sweepers, we do some of that.
Do you get more wrist injuries in sweep than sculling, or tenosynovitis type injuries?
We don't. To be honest, it's pretty rare occurrence with us these days. It's been quite a while since I've had anybody with it. My guess, and it would only be a guess, is it's probably a bit more of a sweep thing. But I think a lot of scullers do suffer from really tight forearms, especially in rough water, and that's, I think, largely because quite a lot of people aren't really taught to feather sculling blades in the early stages of their careers these days, and you tend to find they come up through the levels, through club level to elite level, with dropping wrists a lot, and that's what gives you sore forearms. So I think it can be avoided in sculls, but whether it actually leads to teno or not, I'm not so sure.
Here's a question which came in from North America. What's the most important performance factor for an oarsman which is not measurable by a Cox box?
Yeah, again, an interesting question because way back in my day, we didn't have the electronics in the boat. We didn't even have rate really, so you had to sort of rely on intuition and feel. And I suppose, speaking from my sort of personal experience as an ex-lightweight, I would look at if I was in a small boat and I could see the stern, I'd look at the stern. And if I was in a single, that would be the one thing. I'm always looking at how the stern, is it travelling smoothly, is it level or is it dipping, is it checking? And I suppose if you're in a bigger sweep boat, say if you're in a 4 or an 8 or a quad, I think basically in the middle of the recovery, when you've sort of got the hands away, you've got your body weight over, and you're just with the knees broken, I think that's a really good place to just relax, do nothing, and just have some awareness of how fast the boat feels. So with that in mind, I suppose, ice shut rowing is very, very good, or even rowing in the dark. I used to really enjoy that because you've got a real sense of speed from the boat. I don't know if that really answers the question, but I mean, we are all very reliant on the clock boxes and speedometers these days, aren't we?
I think that your earlier points about video are particularly pertinent. Certainly videoing the stern of the boat through 3 or 4 stroke cycles will give quite a clear indication, particularly if you video from 90 degrees square off, how much it's dipping.
Yeah, I'd go with that, yeah.
How much of an influence has Harry Mahon had on your coaching? Because you co-coached with him a couple of times, like for about 10 years?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I was very, very fond of Harry, and he was a good friend. When I started at Cambridge at the end of 1994, I hadn't actually really heard of Harry, I have to confess, and they said, well, I was the chief coach, but they said, we've got this guy and he's going to help you. And I met Harry, and I heard him coaching, and we started talking, and it was like a bolt of lightning to me that this guy was from New Zealand, around the other side of the world, talking about rowing in such a sort of familiar way that I could identify with, except that it had taken me about 15 years to even begin to sort out how to try and row properly. And here was this guy explaining it all with this tremendous... I think he had the ability to just sort of look inside the athlete and just to describe how to move, what to do, and how the boat should feel, even though he wasn't in the boat. And so he made I think a big impact on me. And we, over the years there at Cambridge, I think the way we used him was really as a guest coach. So he'd come in for a week or 2 weeks, and he'd sort of shake everything up and tell everybody that the Kiwis are a lot better than we were, or the South Africans, or a school that he'd been to last week. And then I think he'd go to the next place and say the Cambridge guys are doing it much better than you are, and he'd sort of play us all off against each other. But yeah, I absorbed. I hope I absorbed a lot of his coaching, because I wouldn't in any sense hold myself up as a comparison to Harry now, but I'd certainly aspire to, because I think he's one of the greatest coaches I've ever met. Certainly,
in my view, a good coach is exemplified by how his or her crews move. And it was always said that you could tell a crew that had Harry coaching them. And I think nowadays, Robin, I'd be able to say I could tell a crew that's had you coaching them, because if you think back to how the British crews were rowing about 15 years ago, the general British club scene was trying to move into this British rowing technique, and you were one of the people who presented the slides on that round country tour. And I certainly remember at least one questioner from the floor that said, when's the British national team going to start rowing like this? It looks like, this is how we should be rowing. And now, of course, I think that the technique that the British crews use is held up around the world as being a pretty good example of how to move a boat successfully.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of you. I would, that's certainly what we aspire to. But I think I've got to do another talk later in the week, actually, to present the technical model to some coaches over here. And I was thinking, that the model is a model, and actually almost every athlete is an exception to the model. In other words, it's very hard to find somebody, an example of an athlete who is perfect, who does it exactly as you think it should be done. And the reality is that people have, long arms, short arms, curved backs, straight backs, whatever. And so I think Harry's particular skill was to not exactly ignore that, but he could see past it. And it was all about, could you translate what you could do into good boat moving? The boat was always the denominator. And I think it's really important not to sort of get bogged down in whether, it is important whether, say, a shoulder is up or down, or whether you sit up or you slouch. And, you should definitely work towards, I think, the ideal. But as I say, I think he could see a bit beyond that as well. Is the boat travelling in the way that it should travel was, I think, always his marker.
Do you find it easier coaching men or women?
Well, I've sort of coached men virtually all my life until about 3 or 4 years ago. I was involved a little bit with the lightweight women when I started working for British Rowing back in 2005. So my experience with women's coaching is relatively recent, and with Helen Glover and Heather Stanning in the pair, it was a very joyous experience, because they were two talented athletes and just two wonderful people who, I think, it's actually irrelevant whether they're men or women or heavyweights or lightweights. I think they have a lot of the qualities that you'd hope any good rower would have. So I actually have enjoyed. I've coached heavyweights, lightweights, men and women, and scullers and sweepers, and I'm not sure whether I have a preference, but right here, right now, I'm coaching women, and I'm really, really enjoying it. Perhaps if you'd asked me that question 15 years ago, I would have said men, because I think women's rowing has progressed and is progressing massively, and it's really exciting at the moment.
Yeah, certainly a noticeable change, and you look at it when you look at the speed difference between top men's and top women's crews, that certainly the gap is closing.
Definitely.
How much work do you think it's taken, looking back over your coaching career, to get to the level of coaching you're at, and how many years to get to where you are now at the top of your game, Robin?
Well, firstly, I don't think I'm anywhere near there, really. I think as a rower, if you think you've cracked it, it's time to retire, and as a coach, if you think you've cracked it, it's time to retire. I go down to the lake every day and go to work, because I still feel there's plenty to learn, and a lot of that is to do with finding better ways of communicating things. I suppose, to try and answer the question truthfully, I don't know, I've been coaching for 22, 23 years and had 15 years or so as a rower before that, so I suppose in a way you could say it's a lifetime, isn't it? But I think I made when I started, there were none of the professional coaching courses that there are nowadays. So physiology and sports science was not really a subject that you could take. So in terms of the hard knowledge, I think people can get there a lot quicker these days. The biomechanics and physiology and training theory and all that kind of thing. Which is obviously part of the coach's job. I think what you get as you get a bit older, and I am getting a bit older now, is you just you mature, don't you? And you've seen a lot more situations and come across a lot more of the problems. So you probably statistically have a better chance of coming up with an explanation or an answer for the athlete. If you think of, there are coaches around who've had success from a very young age and continue, so in that sense, I've been a pretty slow starter and maybe I'm a bit of a stupid coach, but I think it's a lifestyle thing, and it's a lifetime thing, really.
Very interesting. Professionalism in coaching, as you rightly say, is something that's very new to the world, and it's a great thing for our sport that we're now able to fund and support professional coaches, even at club level.
Mm.
We've got a question from Carlos in America, who says, what are your thoughts on the RP3 indoor rowing machine?
Yeah, yes, I know Carlos. Well, I've always, let's go back a few years. At Cambridge, again, in the mid-90s, we were using Row Perfects then, and they weren't as well established as they are now. And I was a fan of the idea of a moving head ergo then, and I still am. The RP3, I have to say, I haven't used very much because we have other machines which we use in the GB team. Sometimes on sliders, and sometimes there's a new concept sliding ergo. Well, the one thing I think that they have made advances with is just the functionality of the machine. To me, looks a lot better than it used to be. So when I used them in Cambridge, we had them 3 or 4 Row Perfects in the corner of the gym, and or a corner of the ergo room, and we used to use them. Well, in fact, Cash the Rakers used to call them a rowing simulator rather than an ergometer. So we'd have the screen there with the power curves, and very much use them as a coaching tool. And I still think there's a good value in that. For a moving head machine, feels more like rowing to me. But there are all sorts of alternatives around these days, and I suppose we tend to use the concept machine because they're ubiquitous, and it's seen a bit more as a training tool for a physiological purpose. So I think it's a little bit of a matter of choosing the direction you want to go in. But yeah, I'm a fan of them basically, and I think they're they're a little bit kinder on knees and backs as well than the fixed machines. Of course, it depends what kind of load setting you put them on. But yeah, I think they're a good machine for sure.
Here's another question that has come in, which I would never have anticipated. What do you think of kettlebell training for rowers?
Yeah, again, an interesting question. I mean, we certainly do use them from time to time, doing kettlebell swings and that sort of thing. I know a friend of mine, Paul Reedy, who's Australian, who coached at London Rowing Club and is now, well, in fact, he coached the lightweight girls double in London as well. He's used those quite a bit at London in the club context. So I think they seem to be pretty good. I mean, we generally use these days free weights more than station weights. So obviously a kettlebell is a free weight. So I'm not sure if there's a particular angle on the question or not. Actually, Rebecca, it sounds like it's quite a specific one, isn't it?
It does, yes. I'm afraid I can't answer that.
Yeah.
Right, we're moving on to the part of RowingChat where we invite the listeners to put additional questions that may have arisen or come to the fore during the chat that you've listened to so far. And I'm going to kick off with the first one, which was from Alistair, who says, what do you think are the 2 most important factors in good technique?
The 2 most important factors in good technique. Well, I try to look at technique under 2 broad headings. One is getting the mechanics right. So body positions, angles, all the things that are measurable. If you looked at the sort of the geometry of the rower, the angles of the oars, all the mechanical things. And I think then the other side of it is feel and skill and touch. And of course, the second one is much harder to describe, and it's I suppose you could kind of call it ability, couldn't you? Some people tend to have they can pick up sports quickly and have good coordination and so on. So I suppose they're 2 broad factors, and I think both need to be good. So especially with people starting off, I think it's really helpful if they get good mechanics, because then they should hopefully stay injury-free. So, for instance, if they sit up well in the lower back and have a good back shape whilst they're rowing, not slumped, and also shoulders relaxed so that they're not tight in the shoulders and loading the body in the wrong way. So I think the mechanics are important. But obviously, skill is everything else, isn't it? It's feeling the boat. It's being aware of the other people you're rowing with. It's time and timing, relaxation, breathing, thinking, steering. It's all the sort of soft skills.
Fantastic. Thinking about what we were talking about earlier about the skill of a coach as a communicator, as an explainer, and thinking particularly about club coaches who aren't professionals but are, committed volunteers, how would you advise a coach to teach themselves how to improve their communication and getting the message over to the athletes?
I think there are different ways. I mean, trying different ways of communication, and you have to really ask people. So some rowers will respond well to quite short descriptions. Other people need longer descriptions. Some respond more to video as a piece of feedback. Some respond more to somebody showing them the movements or the action they're trying to perform. So I think as a coach, you with the verbal communication, I think I'll say something, and I look at the eyes and the body language of the crew. So if they're looking like they're understanding me, then I'll carry on. If I think there's some doubt, then I'll question it and say, do you understand that, or shall I explain it in a different way? But another important thing, if you can do it, if you're in a club where you're coaching amongst a group of other coaches, is to just go out with another coach and just sit there and listen and give each other feedback. But I found that's quite a difficult thing to do, because it's not very nice if you think you're being criticized, but actually it makes you a stronger coach. So if you come out with me in the launch or something and you say, well, Robin, I think what you just said wasn't clear, or that they misunderstood that, I might not like it, but it's actually better that I know that, because I'll improve and I'll make sure I find a better way of saying it. So I think honest feedback for the coaches from the athletes or from other coaches is a really valuable thing.
So it's quite a different style in terms of coaching. We hear in North America that a coach says what he wants and the athletes do, and there is no dialogue, whereas my understanding and my experience, certainly in the club scene in the UK, is that the expectation is that many coaches expect their athletes to give them feedback, as you just said. Have you noticed any variation like that? A
little bit, yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the situation. If you're in, say, a university or a big club or a school where there just may not be that amount of time to get into detailed conversation with people. I mean, to some extent, it is a matter of, say, this is what I need, do it now, and get on with it. And it depends a little bit on the coach to athlete ratio, I suppose. I mean, in my early days as a coach down at London Rowing Club in Putney, I had 110 people turn up on a Saturday morning, and 3 or 4 coaches. So you couldn't possibly spend that amount of time on individuals. You had to give them a good group briefing before they went out on the water. So say, guys, that generally this is what we're aiming to do in this session. So they've got a broad sense of purpose, and use the time off the water to try and catch up with people, and again show them video, that kind of thing. So I think it depends a little bit on the numbers of athletes you're trying to cope with, and I guess in your American example, quite often there are lots of them rowing in clubs, so perhaps, and if they're coaching multiple crews at once, then you more or less have to be quite instructive about your coaching, I think.
We've got a question here from Tom. When you're picking the order of athletes in a crew, what is it that you look for in particular athletes when assigning them to particular positions in the boat? For example, what skills would make you think someone's a good stroke or a good bow?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think for the stroke person, whatever kind of boat it is, I think they definitely need to be in charge of the stern of the boat. And what I mean by that is the way that they are sliding forwards, and that what we discussed earlier, actually, that whole relaxation around the entry and the quality of the pickup. So when I'm on the bank or following a crew, I often am looking at the stroke person as I've got sort of one eye on the stern of the boat and one eye on the stroke person. I just try to get an impression whether that person is on balance with the hull and in time with the hull. And then obviously you look at are they producing a good rhythm? In other words, have they got good acceleration going on? Are they getting a good amount of glide out of the hull? So and then other things as well, like are they rowing a suitable length of stroke and that sort of thing. I mean, in an 8, for instance, so that would be the stroke person. The 7 person is very similar, I think. You're sort of the bow side stroke person. But about the 7 seat and an 8 often can take in a little bit more outside information as well. So in terms of temperament and character, I think quite often the 7 seat can be the person who can help make decisions in an 8 and communicate a bit with the cock. Down in the bow end of a boat, I mean, we always used to say, with the boat race crew, the bow seat and the bow pair are really critical seats because the boat feels light and fast, and there's a lot of life in the boat there. So you've got to have really sort of good skills and again, if you're maybe half a length down, the bow person still feels in touch with the opposition, but the stroke person feels that they're sort of out the back door. So I think there's some psychology involved as well as some boat skills.
And we've got another question from John, who says, you're a technical coach of the highest quality and competence. What's your technique for motivating your athletes for both training and for competition?
Well, I try to be cheerful. I think it is quite important when you turn up every day that you have a sort of sense of cheerfulness and optimism, and rowing, even if you're rowing really, really hard, I mean, it should still be a fun thing to do. I don't think it has to be a miserable occupation, even though it's physically hard. And I remember actually a few years back, Clive Woodward was talking about this when England had won the Rugby World Cup. Sorry to mention that to Kiwis. But he was asked the same question, how do you motivate the players? And he said, well, I just get motivated people in the room. In other words, people are naturally in a state of motivation, and all you can really do is demotivate them. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Most of us actually are by nature fairly cheerful, and it's when you get tired or bad-tempered because something's happened to you or somebody's made a remark, that's when your motivation slips. But I think motivation, naturally exists, and especially in rowing. I mean, I think people who do the sport are generally caught by the bug, and it's hard to stop them talking about it normally. So I think as long as you play to those emotions as a coach and you don't undermine it or destroy it, then I think it's quite straightforward.
Another question from Alistair. Did the girls ever train on the water without you watching them?
Yeah, they did actually. And in 2010, when we started off, I'd actually taken a bit of a back seat from coaching for a while. So when I was asked to come and help out with them, I wasn't there every day. I still had a business to run, and I found that actually a really beneficial thing, because they coaching and working with athletes can become too intensive, and every single session, every single day, and it was good for me, because I would on the day when I wasn't down there, I'd be thinking about what I might say the next day or what I thought we might need to work on. So it kept me fresh as a coach, and it gave them some responsibility. I would say, we need to improve, let's say, something about the finish, and I'm not here tomorrow. I want you to work on this, and this exercise. And I'd come back, 2 days later, and you could quite clearly see that they had done that. So I think they had some sense of empowerment, if that's probably the cliche phrase, isn't it? But I think it was a really good thing, and they certainly did all the training they were supposed to do, and they would be enthusiastic at coming up to me in the morning when I turned up and say, we did the thing you did yesterday and it worked really, really well, or we tried it and we thought it was complete rubbish, whatever it was. It didn't matter, because it just created good communication between us.
Alistair's doing a dissertation, clearly a professional rower in the making, and he says, is there any benefit in a product which could give recordable feedback for a session on output, power, stroke length and timing?
Okay, so say that again. Output,
power,
recordable output on?
Output, power, stroke length and timing.
Well, there is. Those sorts of biomechanics systems exist and are in use. So I think, yes, it is useful. But, those, when you, I think a lot of people use biomechanics and telemetry on their boat to measure those exact things, and they're very useful. And we've used them actually for many years. They've been around probably since the 70s. I think the East Germans certainly had some kind of systems on their boats way back then. Again, the clue is in the title. They are mechanical measurements. So I think it's half the picture, but the other half of the picture is the feel elements and the skill elements. And what the biomechanics don't tell you is how relaxed the person is, or whether if they give it another hundredth of a second of time here or there, that you can feel that kind of improvement, but it's very, very hard to actually measure it on some sort of data output. So I think it's useful information, but it's probably only half the picture.
Talking about relaxation, Robin, what are the physical things you look for when you're just looking at a crew that's rowing past that will tell you whether the crew is relaxed in the way that you want them to be?
Well, I suppose there are, the sort of giveaway things are shoulder positions, but probably upper body positions really. If arms and shoulders look tight, it's not very often that you see that as being a good thing, if ever. Sometimes if I go for a walk down by the river in Henley, on a day off or something, and I see crews go past, I'll sometimes, as a bit of a coaching exercise for myself, I'll allow myself to watch maybe 5 strokes of a sculler, and I'll try and make myself form an opinion about whether that's a good sculler or not based on 5 strokes. So I might spend, say 1 stroke, I'll look at how the stern is travelling. 1 stroke, maybe look at the overall rhythm, the difference between the acceleration and the recovery. I might look at the actual blade work for 1 stroke, and then turn it into a bit of a game, So what things jump out at you? And I think as a coach, you can sort of train your eye if you give yourself small snapshots like that. And sometimes you catch yourself out. And you think, well, I reckon that's a really fast crew, but actually they go out and race and they get soundly beaten. So it makes you think. Sometimes you see the wrong things, and actually, crews that don't look so good are often the fast ones, and sometimes crews that look really, really, really good actually are beaten. So I think that's the sort of irony of the sport, isn't it?
I remember Martin McElroy saying once that he was very much a coach focused on the recovery. So when you played that game, Robin, and you've decided that what you think they need, where do you start coaching them?
I used to, in the days when Harry and I were working together, I had sort of come out of lightweight rowing as a rower, and I always used to start from the back end, and Harry always used to start from the front end, and it was a silly argument because we both insisted we were right, but really it's the two sides of the same coin. Generally speaking, though, I'd probably still, not always, but generally I'd start at the back end, only because I think it's a simpler place to start. The boat is generally a bit easier to balance at that point. And if you're talking about a small boat like a pair, then the platform and the balance is absolutely key, because if you're obviously in a pair, if you row a different length or a different depth or different speed or different power, the boat just doesn't work. You have to match up in every sense. And I think it's sort of easier to start that process off from the back end. But I mean, like everything, nothing works forever. So sometimes if we go out and start with the front end instead. But usually once they've got a basic idea of how the stroke's working in the first place.
Robin, it's been absolutely marvellous having you with us here on Rowing Chat. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your fabulous insights into a very diverse range of questions. So thanks also to the audience of listeners who've come up with most of the questions that we've covered today. And a special thank you from John, who says, he makes me want to be a better coach and has helped me to start in that direction. So big thanks from all of us, Robin.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to have been some help. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Next time, we're going to have Ben Hunt-Davis with us on Rowing Chat, and this is going to be a free Rowing Chat. So thank you all for being with us today, and we'll make sure that you get the information about the date and time of our chat with Ben next month in May. Goodbye, everybody.